Labor Day is a time to recognize the social and economic achievements of American workers. We have reports on two groups of workers who are traditionally underpaid. While average wages in Oklahoma have risen 5.6% in the past 5 years, wages for jobs in state government have remained flat. It's been 7 years since state employees received an across-the-board pay raise. State government is the biggest employer in Oklahoma, and while the cost of living has continued to rise, many workers have left state employment for jobs in the private sector. That has left agencies, including corrections, public safety, and the Department of Human Services, critically understaffed. The first of two planned studies is underway to examine the salaries of state workers and determine whether they will get a bump in pay or not.
When graduation ceremonies were held this summer for the 61st Oklahoma Highway Patrol Academy, 40 new cadets joined the ranks of an agency in desperate need of additional manpower. As the OHP competes with local police departments that offer higher wages, the number of recruits applying for positions as troopers has steadily declined. Oklahoma State Troopers Association President Keith Barenberg says the Highway Patrol ranks 16th in pay among Oklahoma law enforcement organizations, and their wages fare poorly compared with neighboring states.
All the state troopers that border Oklahoma, the only one that was under us was New Mexico. We're trying to get a raise to help recruiting and to help retain the troopers that we have. We spend a lot of money training them. We'd like to keep them.
The patrol is authorized for 925 troopers, but only 774 were available to cover the state's 77 counties before the latest academy graduation. Barenberg says those numbers could fall even further without a pay raise.
We have a large number of troopers, around 200, that could retire at any time. So we're hoping we can get a raise and they will stick around for another year or two while we can get our numbers back up.
Similar stories are reported at the Department of Corrections, where prisons are running at 99% of capacity, while staffing levels are at about 66%. Sterling Zerley is executive director of the Oklahoma Public Employees Association.
Corrections don't only have to compete with other cities and municipalities for correctional officers, they also have to compete with the oil and gas companies we have. ODOT's no different. ODOT has CDL licensed people who drive vehicles. So they have to compete also with oil and gas.
The Office of Management and Enterprise Services conducts an annual study to determine what state workers are paid compared to employees in other state governments and the private sector. The annual compensation report for fiscal year 2012 shows average state employee salaries are more than 24% below salaries for similar jobs in the private sector, and concludes that with state pay so far behind the market, the state stands to lose some of its top talent unless steps are taken to narrow the pay gap with a pay adjustment. In fact, Oklahoma's public employee workforce has been shrinking for years. Since the economic downturn that began after the 2009 fiscal year, the number of state employees has fallen from a high of 39,350 to 35,605 in fiscal year 2013, a decline of more than 3,700, about 10%. The employee turnover rate in FY 2012 was nearly 14%. Hiring and retaining new employees for the same duties as those who left state employment cost almost $88 million. Lucinda Miltenberger is administrator of the Human Capital Management Division of OMES.
Generally speaking, in the industry, we look at it taking between 3 and 6 months of hiring an employee before they're actually functional in that job. So that 3 to 6 months worth of salary can be a loss to the state if you continually turn that job.
The current fiscal year's budget includes no pay hikes for state employees. While lawmakers voted last session to increase pay for corrections workers and state troopers, Governor Mary Fallin asked the legislature to postpone any pay raises until a comprehensive study on state employee pay is completed. Miltenberger says that study will offer a more detailed picture of employee compensation, how it compares with jobs in the private sector, and who the state is competing with for employees.
We know as public employees we're not going to become millionaires. But we do need to have a fair salary amount established for our jobs, and we need to have benefits that are competitive with the market. but what is that market? And what do we want? How do we want to position ourselves within that market?
The study will consider switching to a system that awards pay hikes based on merit. It will also examine both the cost and value of benefits such as health insurance, sick leave, and pension plans. Representative Leslie Osborne plans to use that analysis as the basis for an interim study this fall into state salaries. Osborne says employees should not expect an across-the-board raise.
Probably not, because in all honesty, that's why you do a study like this. We may have a couple of sectors, and things are done in pay bands where people really are paid pretty well. And we may have some where they're vastly underpaid, and that's where it's really not fair to give a 5% across-the-board raise.
One issue that is sure to be looked at is longevity pay, which amounts to about $100 for each year a worker remains employed in state government. Tom Dunning is Communications Director for the Oklahoma Public Employees Association.
Longevity is very important to a lot of state employees because they haven't had a pay raise. So they count on that longevity pay not to do something like take a vacation, but to continue to meet the expenses that they haven't been able to meet due to the lower salaries that they have.
Osborne calls longevity pay an antiquated concept because she believes employees are no longer looking for a lifetime career with the state.
What we want to do is look at things like maybe eliminating some of the things eventually over a 3 or 4 year process with the bill I'll run this session that would eliminate things like the need for longevity pay for some of those kind of things in lieu of something like merit pay.
The price tag for implementing raises is unknown, but Osborne believes it could actually cost less in the long run as employees take on more responsibilities in return for higher pay.
It doesn't necessarily cost the taxpayers more because of the productivity. You may need a few less employees. You get the productivity up, you lose those inefficiencies. It's a win-win situation. It really is.
Osborne plans to begin her interim study in November after OMES wraps up its analysis. She says legislation addressing state employee pay will be ready to file before the 2014 legislative session.